Peter, you were the chair or president of the Trail Builders Association. So he comes to us with, if you were here the last one, with a lot of knowledge. And it was fun, Peter, watching you last time. It's like you could see you going through the Rolodex in your head, like, okay, I've got the perfect example to answer that question. Um, so thank you. We're going to do this format is we are going to open it up for questions, and Peter will answer those questions. If it's a question that is specific to Pennsylvania state parks or state forests, I would say hold that question because we have Paula DeVore and Matt Crosby joining us later in the month to answer those questions like, oh, I need to reroute a trail. What's the DCNR protocol for doing that? So they will speak to those DCNR specific questions. Now, I see there's a Doug in here. We had a question from Doug. Hopefully it's the same Doug. I don't know. And Peter, maybe we'll start with that, which is
Okay.
the use of galvanized steel stucco netting as a traction device for trails. What is your thinking on this?
All right. Well, that's like you said last time, we had a question similar to that about chicken wire. I guess before I can really answer that question properly, I guess, um, does it indicate the size of the openings in that? Because that's a different type of wire than chicken wire for sure.
Well, let's see. I will share the link that was
Okay.
shared with me to this is what where the question was 27-inch by 8.08 feet galvanized. Maybe I can scroll down and we can get some more details on it.
Is there like a technical sheet? Oh, there's specifications down in
Specifications.
the
There
overview.
we go.
Yeah.
Dimensions, common thickness, common width, galvanized steel. Nope, doesn't say.
Anything about the opening size. Okay. So the way I'll answer this one is that chicken wire has a pretty big opening, and I have seen that used and talked with folks that have used it. And the issue there is that it tends to catch, particularly Vibram boot soles. Um, and I've always recommended hardware cloth, which is more of a square opening, quarter-inch square, perhaps half-inch square. But once you get bigger than that, that's when, boot lugs will catch on that. And so not knowing, what the opening size is in that stucco mesh, that makes it kind of hard for me to really render an opinion on that, whether that's, appropriate or not. But if you go and get some or look at some and, the opening size is, half inch or something like that or smaller, then I think it would be interesting to use that.
Looking at it, what we use, it's every bit of half inch or smaller openings on it.
Okay. Well, then I would say, yeah, that ought to be fine then. The other thing to remember is how you're fastening it down. If you're using it on, say, a bridge deck, I would span it all the way across and then fasten it with, staples, fence staples, on the sides so that it can't get caught again in on boot soles. Um, and then it's also, bent over 90 degrees on the sides, and protected from that as well. So that would be my thoughts on using that material.
Thank you, Peter. If you have a question, either unmute yourself or you can also raise your hand and I can call on you. Don't be shy. Well, I'll ask. Go ahead, Fred. You have one?
Oh, yes. What what are your thoughts on handling trails that we have a trail that I manage or that I take care of, and we have a bridge over a stream, but right past it, I have a lot of a wetland type area from a beaver dam, and we just have a few rocks and stuff strewn about for people to get through. How do we make that better and stay within the guidelines of proper trail building maintenance?
Okay, so that really is going to depend on the technique you would use would depend on what the permitting requirements might be. So essentially, what you're saying is you have stepstones. Is that right?
Pretty much just field stones, flat field stones that previous maintainers there placed in a few locations, but it's kind of wet and swampy, and I see a lot of
Uh-huh.
people not being able to traverse that area very well, so they avoid it.
Right, right. Yeah. So, I mean, stone is obviously the best, most durable item. I mean, you could also potentially go with, bog bridges if you're familiar with those. It's two base logs and two, what we call stringers on top. It could be, two planks, 2x8s, for example, nailed onto the base logs, and that elevates everything up above the wet. Um, I think it's also going to be dependent on the nature of the soils there. I mean, is it really boggy or is it just wet?
It's pretty boggy.
Yeah.
It's it's
Okay.
it's just on the opposite side of beaver dam that was made in that area, and a lot of it's kind of swampy. And depending on the time of the year, that you get the overflow from the dam there coming across that, going through a low-lying area. So it is kind of swampy. If it weren't for the rocks, I think anybody that went through there would probably have wet feet. But it does help, and I was just trying to see if there's a better way to handle that I could go to the park office and explain, or something like that, that maybe we can make it
Yep.
better in the future.
Right, right. I mean, ultimately, depending on what the distance is there a better place? Despite the fact you've got a bridge there over the stream, but is there a better place, upstream or downstream where you could cross and have, a more solid tread?
Yeah, that location, unfortunately, no, because to the one side of it is within 10, 15 feet is the beaver dam, and it's kind of wet. And the other side, it slopes down into a valley. So you would be very much off the trail and
Yeah,
down through the woods to probably some low-lying wet areas, maybe wetlands or something like that. So it's a little difficult, and it's not a far
right.
stretch. It's probably uh 40, 50 feet maybe.
Hmm.
It's not that bad. And then it starts to climb uphill again up into the woods, so then you're okay.
Right. So what is the bridge deck elevation above the ground that's on that side where it gets wet?
It's almost level with that swampy area. It's probably only up a
Oh,
few inches, because it sits back probably another 15, 20 feet from where that swampy area is, and it's just elevated enough so that it crosses over that um stream that's there. And I think that's pretty much the outlet from the beaver
oh,
dam itself. But there's enough water coming out of the beaver dam up above that is causing that swampy area. So I'm not sure how to best
right,
navigate that.
right. Because another thought I'm having is that, it would take more work to do this, but you could raise the bridge up a bit. I mean, with the severity of storms that we've been getting, you might be better off actually having that bridge up a little higher. It really depends on the watershed above that particular crossing section of the stream. But by elevating that up, then you could essentially construct like I said earlier, either bog bridge, or you could actually make it a little more formal and build, more of a boardwalk extension on that bridge. So if you were to, essentially create piers, and that could be made out of timber and then span, joists, from the bridge, the end of the bridge to however many piers you might need. If you think about having to carry material in, a 10-foot 2x8 pressure treated, for example, can span, up and upwards of 10 feet, so that way you'd have to have some sort of support every 10 feet, not knowing how long that wet section is.
Sure. Yeah, that would be a little challenge, which in order to do it, we would have to get enough help because it's almost in the middle of the trail area that I maintain, and it's quite a ways off the main roads.
Yeah.
So bringing
Yeah.
materials in would be a challenge. I mean, it's not impossible, but it would be a challenge. And then the
Right.
only other thing would be is like you said, putting some sound footing in for that bridge, being that it's wet there, that I not knowing enough about that terrain underneath and that I would be wondering about like what winter with frost heave, stuff like that, how we
Mhm.
would build it so that it stays stabilized for the most part.
Right, right. Well, then, I mean, what's the nature of the forest there? Do you have hemlocks available in that
There's some
area?
hemlocks right around that swampy area because of the
Okay.
location is perfect habitat or
Yeah.
terrain for it. And then pretty much after you leave that, you go up into a hardwood forest, basically beech, maple, stuff like that, some oak interspersed, but there is hemlocks down in
Yeah.
this particular area right there.
Okay. All
And then the
right.
high bush
Up.
blueberry and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. So up in the hardwoods, any white oak?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Farther up on the
Okay.
hill. I mean, it's
Yeah.
as you get toward the top of that incline.
Right. Right. So that presents a couple of different options. That classic bog bridge, which is, two base logs. And the base logs could be, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3, perhaps 4 feet, depending on the width of, the area and how boggy the soils are. Um, and, if you were to cut, maybe some, let's say 10-inch hemlock, okay,
Okay.
you could actually not, and also the white oak. The white oak, if you use that as a base logs, okay, and it's in the wet, the sapwood will rot eventually, but the heartwood, if it's encased in water or muck, they will last a long time. Um, and then you span that distance with hemlock stringers, and then you would basically just top those so you have a flat surface to walk on. If you've got folks that maybe you have the skills too, but you could take a larger hemlock like a 12-inch and you could split it in half with a chainsaw and you have a smoother surface. I've observed over the years that if you take let's just say a saw, a chainsaw, or even a handsaw, and you score it, and then you chop off, that round part of the wood to create a flat to walk on, that there's more surface area there, and then the logs tend not to last as long because water will get in there and it tends to rot it more prematurely. But a sawn, you know, uh, log like that, and if it's hemlock, I would guess it could last, at least 8, probably 10 years, maybe more. It depends, but so.
Okay, sure, great. That's all great advice and some great ideas and that. Yeah, as far as cutting that, I'm skilled to cut it, but I can't do it because I'm not certified.
Okay.
So the park, will not allow that. Even with the trail maintenance, I'd be more than happy to clear some of
Yeah.
those areas. But as of right now, they don't allow that.
Yeah.
Right.
We got to get you to a saw training.
Yes.
Exactly.
And but remember too that like, and I think Peter mentioned this, is if you're thinking about any of these, you should go to your park manager, your district forester
Oh,
before you.
absolutely. I won't touch
Yeah.
anything without our our people giving approval.
Mhm.
Excellent. And Terry, you had posted a question, but that's what that question I think we would say for when we have state parks and state forest, because that's really a state, a DCNR specific question, not necessarily a Peter question. So, uh, Andre, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I can read what I just typed in. Just now, Peter, you were just chatting about this. You mentioned 2x8 with a 10-foot span. Basically, I'm asking, is that sort of an off the cuff, or is that a real number? And I'm questioning, is that, 2x8 dimension boards, like, one on each side of your walkway? Just getting a sense of what the maximum for foot traffic using various
Sure. Right. So,
sizes.
so right. 2x8 by 10 foot is typically the span that we will use for example, boardwalk construction. And it's literally as installed as a joist. Okay. It's not something that you would lay flatways. That will not work. Okay. But as a vertical element, and you would have, let's say your boardwalk is 3 feet wide, you would have a minimum of three, in that space. If you want to think about 16 on center, you could do that, and you have 2 inches of deck overhang on either side. That would give you your 16 on center. So,
Okay, thanks. That's a useful number to keep in our back pockets. Appreciate that.
sure. Yep.
Other questions?
Yeah, I had a question while we were talking about certification. So I've been notified. I know I've actually notified one of my guys who knows whoever we're supposed to talk to get training. And it seems like maybe once a year or something, I find out there's a training, but it's, a couple hours away from my home, and it always seems to be either a weekend I'm away or I'm working full time and I can't do it. Is there another organization that I could look into that I could get certified that would be honored and recognized?
The ones that we recognize are listed on the chainsaw policy. And, we're hoping to bring Peter back. It's a matter of supply and demand when it comes to Peter. He's in demand. So we bring him in when we can. We will be having 4 single-day workshops, not with chainsaw, but on trail building this spring, level 1 and level 2, each in the east and in the west. And we can't really get around the driving aspect of it because Pennsylvania is a big state. So when we schedule them, we try to have them close to people that said, I'm interested in attending a workshop.
Sure.
Yeah. So we can talk a little bit about that then, but Peter is our preferred because we know that you're getting a good training. We also know that it's not you're just giving us certificate training, you have to show proficiency. So we want to make sure that, because this is probably the most dangerous volunteer activity you could do is wielding a chainsaw, we want to make sure that you're safe.
Yeah. Since my park is tucked away in the southeastern part of the Pennsylvania, can we move my park to more central and I'll relocate?
We'll do that.
Thanks. Put that on your list, if you will.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm going to chime in about the chainsaw training and just say that, I took one training with Peter and Carl, I guess it was, and had a wonderful time. It's an intensive 2 days, highly recommended. And then re-upped and got my B card, yay, from Bob Sickley. So maybe it's Peter, maybe it's his designee, but
Right.
Wonderful training, some of the best education on anything I've ever gotten. I really appreciate it and can't recommend it enough to anyone on the call who's going to be a sawyer.
Yeah. And I think, Brett, if you talk to Gary will tell you he's done several different ones and that Peter's was the best.
My son told me I can just get it from YouTube and be ready to go.
Yeah.
He swears by it.
Is your son home? I need to talk to him.
He doesn't need parents either. He just needs YouTube. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So a question that came in here was simple or maybe not question. When does a trail rerouting become something that is more than just a way of getting around an obstacle?
Can you read that again? There's more to that question, I think.
When does a trail rerouting become something that is more than just a way of getting around an obstacle?
Oh,
and Al,
okay.
if you wanna explain what you're getting at, Al?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So Peter, I volunteer at Tyler State Park and at Nockamixon State Park, and we're in the middle of the ash trees all coming down. So we have trees right and left. And, for the most part, the ash trees, if they're a reasonable size ash tree, we can cut them out of the trail and go on about our business. But once in a while, we've got something come down that's so big that we don't really have it. It's not either. It's just not practical. In some cases, we've had some trees that have come down, have been, in excess of 35 inches diameter. We can just barely get through them with a normal chainsaw that we would typically carry into the park. And then once we cut the pieces off, we have a heck of a time just rolling them out of the way because they're still heavy as can be. So
Right.
the question really is, at times we would like to just simply say, well, let's just abandon this trail and go around behind the stump and back onto the old trail. And the question is, at what point, how much of a deviation from the trail do we make before it suddenly becomes an issue where DCNR has to approve it and that sort of thing?
Okay. All right. Great question. And I think, this would also be a question for when you have your conversation with, with the state as well. But just a couple of things that I would suggest is that, depending on the terrain, okay, does going around the stump put you on the downhill side, or does it put you on the uphill side? Okay. If it puts you on the uphill side, the benefit there is perhaps, okay, that you could create what we call a grade reversal, because you're going to actually go up slope a little bit and then you're going to go back down again. And so that creates a point at which water can't continue to flow on the treadway. If you're going down below, yeah, the water may drain off there, but you may also have some side hill issues, again, depending on the terrain. So I would suggest you kind of look at those kinds of parameters, in trying to make that decision. Does it make sense to go around based on the terrain, or do we want to, struggle our way through, removing that tree? So, and I can't really answer the question as to whether or not, from a permitting standpoint or the park standpoint, whether, doing that is going to be, violating some rule. I would suggest that, if you're in an area where you've got potential sensitive, species, plant species, you want to be careful about that and really ask before you do something like that. Does that help?
It does. It does. I think that, generally speaking, like we just had an incident just recently where we had a hanger that was about 40 feet off the ground, right over top of the trail. And when I talked to the park manager, I informed them about it. I said, I'm not trained to take down standing trees anyway.
Sure.
But even if I wasn't about to try something like that anyway, because that was a very, very dangerous situation. And we had discussed whether it would make sense just simply to reroute the trail around, so we weren't under that hanging tree. And so I got the park manager involved, and he made the final decision. Ultimately, he sent his crew in, and I think they put a rope on the tree and dragged it down.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think that was a good process that you went through there. Okay.
Great, thanks.
Thank you for not cutting it down, Al.
This was a widowmaker.
Yeah.
I knew better than to get near that one.
Yes, good. Okay, so there's another question in the chat box. There are a number of trails that have been lost over the past few years due to a large number of fallen trees that we would like to recover. What would you recommend to map out a rerouted trail?
Okay. So I think what this sounds to me like is to walk the old trail and essentially do an assessment. And you figure out what sections are still good, from a treadway standpoint. And maybe there are sections that are eroded or, whatever, and that you identify those and then start, sort of map that out. And then those become control points. And so what you can then do is say, okay, well, we can utilize this piece of trail, but we can't use that. Even though it's good because it's sort of sandwiched between two really bad sections. So we're going to look at, routing the trail in a different location. So it becomes an opportunity. I mean, you're still going to end up probably having to, clear, vegetation and blowdowns to create that new alignment. Again, I think that's also a question for the park manager is, what's going to be, allowable or not in a section like that. Um, and this is where I think we're going to actually talk about this in one of our sessions in April. How to deal with enhancing the sustainability of a particular trail. So I hope that's sufficient in that answer.
Um, that's good. If I can follow up. So, because we would plan to whatever we think would be the, potential new trail to take this back to the park manager and get their approval on it. But is there a way that you would recommend for mapping it out? Tracking it in GPS or some mapping, just walking and flagging it.
Well, yeah, I mean, so is there a brochure or a trail map that shows the old trail currently?
Some of them, if we go back to some of the older ones. I mean, one of the trails we lost since Superstorm Sandy, so it's
Gotcha.
been a
Okay.
while. But
Right.
and I work with Al a lot. He does the chainsaw work, but I do spotting and whatnot while he's cutting. But there were trails that were horse trails that we've lost, and so now you're walking on the paved areas. And if we could get back to that, that would be really beneficial.
Right. So you're talking about trails that would be used by horses?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, in terms of mapping, I think if you're good with sort of the spatial orientation of where you are in relationship to the or to the old trail, you could potentially pencil something in on a map. But using a GPS, you could do that. I mean, if you have Gaia, for example, you could use Gaia to map that. Or if you have a real GPS, you could do that as well. And it might make sense if it's not too much trouble, to walk the old trail as well, so that you have that as a baseline to show where the new trail would be in relationship to the old one.
Okay.
Part of that has to do with the old trail may have been cleared from a um, you know sensitive species standpoint, or some other reasons, and that your new alignment may be in part of that area, and therefore have less overall uh, you'll have less overall challenge getting it approved.
Okay. Yeah. Good points. Thank you.
Good questions. Brad.
Yeah, I had a question. It's around trails that are just getting worn down and all the roots are there, so it just becomes a tripping hazard. What's the best approach to handling those, to improving the trail access without just, tossing dirt in and having it just wash away in a day anyway?
Okay, so in those kinds of situations, the first thing I will do is I'll look at options for relocating. So what kind of a forest situation are you in? Conifers or hardwoods?
It's hardwoods and it's been bench cut because it's on a bit of a hill. So we have to move it, we could do
Okay.
it, but it would have to be bench cut again.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm sure you probably have some hanging roots then as well. Where soil is eroded around the roots and they're just sticking up. I mean, you mentioned tripping hazards. So, yeah, I mean, those could get cut out. If there's an aversion to cutting out those roots, what you can also do is you can also, if you have stone on site, ideally small stone, but you can always make bigger stone into smaller stone. It requires a little bit of work, swinging a hammer. But by backfilling with crushed stone over the roots, you could then, take mineral soil and put on top of that and create a new, treadway within the same alignment.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's
Great.
an option. One
Thanks.
of the things that I've seen is are trails where they go through conifer forest, particularly white pine, and just from the compaction of the soil, over decades, the root systems just get so gnarly and intertwined that ultimately you end up walking on this, essentially carpet of roots. And it's not it's not a great scenario because a lot of people tend to want to avoid that. And so then you get trail widening going on. But the fact that it's bench cut, originally, that's great. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
yep.
We have another question here in the chat box. It says, we have a large number of sections of trail that run adjacent to a lake. These are often flat on the uphill side, and relocation is not optimal as they tend to be wet at least 4 to 6 months of the year. With the more intense rainfalls we are seeing, these sections flooded as the lake rise. Have you ever used a rock causeway in lieu of wooden elevated trail?
Yes. So we also call them turnpikes, where you're basically building up. You can use stone, either side, and then you backfill with stone in the middle, and then you cover it. Typically, you'd want to cover it with a geotextile so that there is drainage underneath, and then you put mineral soil on top of that geotextile to keep that soil from migrating down into the spaces between the stone that's below that. So that there's, uh, cross flow, underneath the treadway. The other thing that you want to do in situations like this, if it's flat like that, is also to have open sections. If you want to think of it as an open culvert, maybe you're doing a 10-foot section and then you have a 1 foot gap, and then you go another, 15-foot section and have another gap, to allow water to flow from one side to the other. You don't want to create essentially a dam, on the uphill side so that stormwater can't get across. Otherwise, you're going to have issues with, the water building up on that side.
And he's right. Whenever I hike that trail, I always wear waterproof boots, or sometimes I feel like I want to wear my rubber boots. So Peter, you kind of touched on something. Some of these questions all kind of link back to it. We've been having very odd weather events. How can people who are maintaining trails look ahead and plan for the sustainability of these trails when we have these epic rainfalls?
That's a big question.
Yeah, it is. And we don't have to answer it because we're going to talk a little bit about it in the training.
Sure.
In-person
No,
training.
Right. But I think it's like what I mentioned earlier about, I think it was the very first question about that bridge, knowing that if you've got a bridge on your trail, take a look at its elevation relative to the stream and what what's called full bank looks like, in terms of how high is the water typically, okay, in a spring runoff or, a inch an hour thunderstorm in the summertime, or that kind of thing. And if it's close to that deck, then it would make sense to raise that bridge up or find a different crossing location, so that it doesn't end up downstream somewhere in one of these severe weather events. And you all obviously saw the impacts of Helene in North Carolina and Virginia and so on and so forth. And so that's one thing, and then also looking at, I guess I would consider looking at low spots, where water tends to accumulate. The last question was somewhat similar to that. And with a turnpike like that, you also want to be thinking about, okay, well, how high will the water get? And so how high plus some should we build this to keep it from being inundated? And then, other places, just looking at a trail, wandering through meandering through the forest, and you've got grades on that tread or trail. What's happening on those? How long is that continuous grade? Where can water get off? conveniently. Um, you know, and again, this is something we'll talk about in the trainings in April. How to deal with situations like that. And I really want to look at a section of trail that has sort of a long run where water, particularly, a section of perhaps it's an old charcoal road, or even an old road that has a long grade to it and no opportunity for water to get off. And we'll talk about how to make a section like that more sustainable. And what it typically requires are a series of small relocations, to the uphill side, so you can build in some of these grade reversals to help do that, as opposed to building in water bars, which just take constant maintenance. So that's some of the stuff
Yes.
that we'll talk about.
Great, thank you. And Al was reading my mind, because it's not just weather, it's also, we have these regular diseases and pests that are taking out our trees, which change the trail experience or cause hazards on the trail. So,
Increase maintenance because now there's more light coming down to the forest floor.
yes. So, other questions?
So
Go ahead, Andre.
I got a question. This isn't a trail that I'm actually in the decision-making loop, but for those of you who know the Pole Steeple Trail at Pine Grove Furnace and into Michaud State Forest, the State Forest, working with volunteers, is working on a mountain biking slash hiking, but it's really mountain biking loop that's going to cross directly this very busy hiking trail that goes up. I think they may be doing the crossing at a charcoal hearth that's a kind of a landing. So we suddenly have an extremely busy foot traffic trail where what I think is going to be fundamentally mountain bikers are crossing it, briefly. Um, Peter, do you have any just general thoughts about how to manage that besides, and I don't know what Michaud Forest actually is planning to do. They may not know themselves to sort of manage the traffic, because simply putting up signs, people ignore signs as it is, and I just see a user conflict
Yeah.
about to happen.
Right. Okay. So, is the mountain bike trail going to be directional?
I don't think so.
Okay. So that presents a challenge for the mountain bikers right there. They're coming at each other, because my sort of response to this is that to have that mountain bike trail, if it was directional, okay, come up in an up slope, so the bikes are moving slower as they get to that crossing, as opposed to obviously coming downhill, they're going to be going a lot faster. Um, but yeah, I mean, signage, that was one of my my answers as well. But obviously, you've already experienced that, the ineffectiveness of that. Yeah, I think trying to also think about line of sight, for the bikers to be able to see if hikers are coming up or down, on the hiking trail, so they have an opportunity to, alert folks. I mean, the hikers, if I get this right, I don't do too much with mountain bike trails, but I believe on some of these shared use type trails, I believe the hikers have the right of way. And so that's a tough one, because, if you're on a bike going downhill, that means you got to slow down and stop, which again is why, orienting that mountain bike trail so that they're actually coming uphill to the crossing, in this case would be that charcoal pit. That would slow them down.
That's
I guess
that's a
that's the best I can really do at this point, is
Yeah,
to
that's a
say that
really
that's
useful point, though. And I, unfortunately, like I said, I don't know what the forest plan is for this, but you're right about forcing people to slow down. I almost feel like we should have four-way stop sign, like, when you're driving, because it's this conflict of users who are not necessarily expecting to encounter each other at
right.
a particularly busy trail. There's no good
Right.
solution unless we have an
Right.
overpass in the woods or something.
Yeah, yeah, or underpass. But yeah, you're right. I think I mean that is the standard on shared use paths. There are lots of stop signs. I mean when a like a rail trail, for example, crosses a street or a road, they have a stop sign. So that might be, as opposed to saying, warning hiking trail ahead or something like that. Actually use a stop sign.
I will offer some thoughts to Michaux State Forest because
Yeah,
I really think that they're not used to dealing with some of these subtleties. And
right.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
actually a really good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Where on the Michaux is this now?
So if you're familiar with the Pole Steeple hiking trail, it's not very long, but it's steep up to the rock overlook behind the south of Laurel Lake. There's a whole network on that hillside that's been underway for going on 2 years now,
Uh-huh.
that is officially shared use. But as a practical matter, I really think it's mountain bikers are going to dominate. And
Yeah.
it's there's like 3 loops, some of it's built. The part that I'm worried about with this conflict of user groups is not yet there. It's mapped out, but they haven't
Mhm.
constructed it yet.
Oh, okay. So you have an opportunity to actually, make that suggestion about changing that alignment.
Maybe.
Great.
Yeah. And the
Okay.
direction wall is a good point. And we do have on our website an infographic on who has the right of way. If it is a helpful educational tool because sometimes people don't realize. Oh, there we go. We've got one coming up. You're with your screen being blurred. It's not coming through right away, but yes, you can wear it on your shirt. Hey, I have the right of way.
In
Good
practice
question.
around here, mountain bikers are moving faster usually, so it's usually
Yeah.
polite to just step off to the side and let them through,
Right.
and everyone's happier that way. But yeah, and so not everyone is gracious in all directions.
Yeah, you're right.
Can be done. It can be done. Okay, other questions?
Well, Marcy, this is Jim Ugar.
Yes.
Somebody alluded earlier, and I've noticed it happening in Pinchot, is that with all of the diseased trees, the edge of the trails are getting piled up with decomposing logs that aren't decomposing fast enough that it's a bit of an eyesore if nothing else, because you feel like you're walking through a downed forest in part. Any suggestions on dealing with that? I think we're all going to probably be facing that from the sounds of things. But
Yeah, that's an excellent, excellent question. I deal with this in the saw trainings as well. That as part of your cutting plan, you really need to, figure out where you or what you're going to do with that cut material. I always encourage, especially larger logs, that they're laid down perpendicular to the treadway, because one of the major things that you don't want to do is trap water on the treadway, right? And so getting the logs off the trail, if there's, too big to really, move, well, I guess you roll them, to at least get them so that they're perpendicular to the trail and not a whole series of them lined up next to each other. But try to scatter that as much as possible. But you're right. I mean, I've seen this too, especially in the areas where the ash trees and emerald ash borer have, devastated the trees. So it's a critical thing, and it comes back to the maintainers understanding that leaving a tree next to the trail parallel to the treadway is only going to make life worse for them in the long haul. So you've hit on a really good point there.
Thank you. Don Lehigh, I saw that you had unmuted yourself.
Yeah. Um, you already touched on this, but we have several trails in Michaud that are there. They go right down over a fall line, and they're maybe 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep or something like that. And water bars aren't going to work because it's sort of up on both sides.
Right.
There's talk of rerouting, but that could be years from now. Is there anything you can do right now? I've heard about check dams. Is there anything to do right now?
Yeah, yeah, you're referring to, they're called check steps. Basically inserting or installing logs across the trail that act as steps. Um, and I'm not really a fan of those. I think what the best thing to do is figure out where you do have an opportunity to drain water off and build a water bar. You know, top of the slope, mid slope's probably not going to work because you're already entrenched. And then certainly at the bottom, there's probably a pretty sizable pile of material that has eroded down the trail. But ultimately, the solution is to relocate that. So you're on the right track there. But yeah, I think just trying to figure out where you can get water off up high, on that. I mean, if you've got a section of trail that's fall line for, a couple 100 feet, that's a real challenge. You could, it'd take a bunch of work, but you could do it if you actually pick a spot where you could actually build steps, and it might require, the use of timber perhaps, but build a staircase or stairway that gets you up to, up and out of that trench, okay? And then go a little bit higher. And that way you have the opportunity to, well, number one, create a reversal, but also to drain water off the trail. So that's really the best I can give you on something like that, short of, bringing in a piece of mechanized equipment to actually, dig some drains.
The stairway you're talking about, was that in the ground or like raised above it?
No, it's in the ground. You have to start. So let's say I think you mentioned entrenched 2 feet.
Yeah.
Okay. So 2 feet is 24 inches, right? And so if we think about I mean if you have to bring timbers in, for example, and like 6x6s, which are 5.5, the nominal size. So that means for every two timbers, you can gain 11 inches. So, so four timbers will get you to 22. So you really need, five steps at a minimum. And it probably would be beneficial to add a sixth step. All right. So that gets you up high enough that you're going to actually create this reversal that gets you back down to the existing grade on either side, and then you have to determine which side of the trail you want to drain water off of. It's a piece of work for sure to do that, but it is an option.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. It looks, when you look at it, it looks like this is hopeless.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Okay.
I think the challenge is we had trails, a lot of trails built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, and our knowledge of trail building has changed quite a bit since then. So these fall line trails are oftentimes historic trails.
Yes. Thank you.
Other questions? While you're thinking, I want to take a moment. One of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation board members is with us, Paul Fogel. Hello, Paul. Thanks for joining us. Paul is a Pocono Whitewater, Pocono Bicycle Paintball Skirmish, Pocono Skirmish.
Skirmish paintball.
Okay, I always get that one wrong. Avid paddler, avid bicyclist. But thank you for being here. Did you have a question, Paul?
No, it's been very interesting though. I've learned a lot. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Peter, do you want to take a few minutes? We sent out an email about the two trainings, level 1 and level 2. I don't know, Pam, if maybe you can bring that up if it's at your fingertips, the email. And just give us a little sneaky peek of what that looks like and how people might say, okay, this is the level that I need to be in, or you can do both of them. They'll be back to back. The Eastern one we know is going to be at French Creek. The one for Western PA, we're in conversations with Canoe Creek, but it's not firmed up yet. And I know it's might require some driving, but we chose places that had that were mapped out all the friends groups that were doing trail work and tried to get it as convenient as possible. So
Okay, so level one, which we're going to do level one in both locations, but essentially level one really means dealing with things like blowdowns, dealing with brush, pruning branches, and I want to focus on, you know, making sure that the pruning stuff is done properly to really protect the integrity of the remaining vegetation. And so the other some of the other things that we're going to talk about, just some preliminary assessment, like for example, what's the worst section of a trail and what might be causing that? Because sometimes there could be, kind of like the comment in the last question was, you got this trench, and it seems like it's an impossible thing to deal with. But investigating a little further, along the trail might give you some answers as to, number one, why it's being caused, and number two, how you might be able to actually fix it, fairly simply. And the fixing part is really in the level two section that we're going to look at. So the third from the bottom, evaluating trail treadway and stormwater flow, that's all part of that. And we'll also talk about, in terms of blowdowns, I've done lots and lots of saw trainings, and trail maintainers are always saying, yeah, we got a report of a massive blowdown, and they get out there and it's 6 inches in diameter, type of thing. And so, we'll talk a little bit about what's going to be the best way to, get that information to sawyers, so that they can prepare adequately for dealing with things like that. And then, of course, we'll also obviously cover some of the hand tools that we're going to use in the level one process, as well as I also want to talk about some maintenance of those tools as well. Having a set of dull pruners does not make for a fun experience, nor a healthy experience for the tree or bush that's getting pruned. So that's essentially level one. Level two, drainage is going to be a big one there. Looking at that, how we might deal with, again, like the question we just had. But there's others too. I mean, we've had plenty of questions regarding drainage here tonight. And part of that too is understanding the drainage is really an assessment process. And so we'll focus on that in the level two piece, so that you can get better information and make better decisions on, priorities. The trail in that park is going to need more work based on what we found there versus the trail in another park, so on and so forth. Method for categorical exclusion. I think, Marcia, you're going to need to help me on that one. I kind of recall that we had a conversation about this, but this has to do with the state.
Yeah, it's funny because I was waiting to hear what you had to say, because you mentioned it. I wrote it down, and I'm like,
right.
I don't know what it is. And that's why we looped in Paula to make sure that we understood what
Yes.
the state parks, what
Yeah.
their parameters are now for water.
Right. Okay, so now I remember what it was that what I was referring to there, and that is that, is it possible to have a corridor, or a set amount of distance on either side of a trail that is categorically excluded from having to go to a park manager to talk about something? And so the example I gave about, doing a short relocation, or for example, the question about the, going around a stump, or around a blowdown and around the stump of the tree versus having to cut that out. Is that, could that be considered within that categorical exclusion piece? And so I think it would make sense to have, some flexibility for trail maintainers to make that decision, on the ground without having to, sending it up the chain to figure it out. Now, having said that, there are certainly things, when it comes to, wetlands, and, other things too that might be specific to, Pennsylvania parks and forests. And that's something that you all will need to, figure out. And I think that's a question for Paula, when you have that next, session with those folks. And trails and stream crossings. I mean, we had a question like that earlier as well. Just looking at, what are the characteristics of the stream, severe weather events, what impact might that have? But specifically, I really want to talk about how trails should approach stream crossings, whether or not there's a bridge there, okay? Because what we don't want to have is we don't want to have a section of trail that basically grades down to a stream crossing, and then there's all kinds of stormwater flow and sediment that goes into the stream. So we'll talk about how to change tread alignment to deal with those kinds of things. And this idea of opportunities to shift trails, that really focuses on sustainability. And turnpikes, we've also talked about that earlier today. So, it's going to be up to Pam and Marcy to find us the best examples that we can work with, in these various parks, so we can focus on this stuff. And of course, root issues, that's a perennial one as well.
Thank you, Pam. So we don't have the registration up yet on the website for that. We're hoping to secure the Canoe Creek, that one, the park manager was going out to make sure that there were some trails that could meet the needs for the training. So we're waiting to hear back from him, but hopefully we'll have that up next week, or at the latest by like the 17th or the 18th. As many of the managers will be at the park manager meeting next week. So I'm looking forward to the training. I know it'll be very good.
And there's also an opportunity for state folks to be at that too, correct? Because it's during the week.
Yes, and actually I've had some questions from some state employees.
Great.
And actually I had a question about whether or not you would be willing to do one just for state employees. That was asked by somebody within DCNR if that would be a possibility.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So we'll work on those. We'll work on getting all that in place. And then Pam, can you remind me of the date for the thing with Paula and Matt? The conversation. I could look on my phone too. I didn't want to pull my phone up. Don't have it in my memory. Maybe the 17th, 18th.
I was
the
thinking
19th.
19th. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the 19th at 6 o'clock, it'll be Paula DeVore, who is the sole person in state parks that goes out and looks at trails for trail rerouting and projects. And then Matt Crosby from State Forest will be on the call so that you can ask questions that are very specific to state parks and state forest here in Pennsylvania. So great.
Great.
We just turned 7 o'clock, and we want to honor everybody's time. Is there any final question of Peter before we thank him profusely again for sharing his knowledge with us? Isn't it neat to watch his mind work? I'm watching him do the math on the lumber. It's like this. You can tell it's not just it's a passion for you as well, Peter, and we appreciate that.
It is.
We all benefit from it. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in person And I'm sure you and I will talk again before the trail workshops at the end of April.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and yeah, we'll talk about tools and things like that that need to be at the training. So trainings.
Yep. And thank you all
Okay.
for being here. We know that your time is precious, and we appreciate that you gave us some of your evening to learn more about trails and for your volunteer work with trails. Thank you.